Okay, welcome back everyone. Now let's go talk about Chapter 16. Chapter 16 also talks about material requirements planning in the ERP system. And this begins on Chapter 404. What we want to discuss tonight, or today rather, will be the system, the MRP versus the order point system, all the way down to the ERP or Enterprise Resource Planning System. So as you think about this particular chapter, really the complexity that organizations have to deal with when it comes to their inventory control could be massive. And when you think about the inventory control, you're talking about the products, the processes, the human resources, the parts, the volatility in the market in which they operate, those uncontrollable or controllable forces that they're dealing with. And as a result of that, most manufacturing firms have a vast amount of different type of products and parts that they have to manage to meet their unique demands in which they're trying to do this. And trying to do this via paper obviously would be absolutely, in today's environment, almost impossible. So to help manage this material requirements planning, which is in essence a computer software or computerized planning and control, is one way in which companies can manage the demands of the raw materials, their in-process parts, and how the parts can be utilized to their maximum efficiency on the manufacturing process to ensure that those components are turned into tangible products for consumers. And this particular system really derives its power from the important distinction between independent demand and dependent demand inventories that we talked about in Chapter 15 somewhat, where independent demand inventories are subject to the market conditions and are thus independent of the operations, where dependent demand inventories are not subject to the market conditions. They are dependent on the demand for the higher level parts or the components up to and including what they have in the master schedule, which is driven by the S&OP. And when you think about that master schedule reflects the end items or the output that the organization is trying to do through its production capabilities. And is looking at all of its future demands in its work process and the raw materials that are dependent upon the master schedule, which is driven from this MRP system. And this master schedule then in turn is driven by the future total expected demand or its forecasting model, which includes the sales. It is operation planning or the S&OP, that's forecast from its customers for its orders and its goods and its finished inventory. So this MRP software really explodes the master schedule into the purchase orders of raw materials, for materials and shop orders that are scheduled for the factory to go develop. And as you think about this parts explosion, it really determines all the parts and the components needed to make a specific number of units. And this parts explosion, again, is broken down to all the requirements using the bill of materials. And that bill of materials sometimes is used to determine the back way of determining what parts are going to be needed and that into the minimum inventory levels so that you get into the reorder point so that you can make sure that you never lose or get your inventory down to a point where you have stockouts. So that's really what all that is about. So this is some of the history, of the MRP system. This is a graphical example. Figure 16.1 on page 407, which represents a system, MRP system as an information system that's really used to plan and control inventory and capacity. As you can see, information is processed through the various parts of the system, and they're processed through so that um, managerial decision making can be supported. And if you look at this type of system, there's two types of MRP systems. One is the type 1, which is over on page 407, 408, which is an inventory control system, which is a minimal inventory control system that releases its manufacturing and purchasing orders for the right quantity at the right time to support the master schedule. It's almost like a just-in-time inventory and manufacturing process that's based on the specific man at that particular time. And this particular system launches the work orders to control the working process and the raw material inventories of this process. The type 2, which is a production and inventory control system, includes everything that you see here in figure 16.1, but is also an information system that's used to plan and control the inventories and control. This type of system also has a closed loop system where it controls both the inventory as well as the capacity of the resources used to support the production. This type of system is called a manufacturing resource planning system. And they give us a great example there in the operations leader on page 408 about 3M in Canada. And in part of this type of system, there's an enterprise resource planning system, which is a company-wide enterprise system that's really looking at taking all of this on the MRP system and integrating that into controlling all of the resources within that organization, which includes inventory capacity, cash, personnel, facilities, capital, and everything else that goes on to the day-to-day operation of a particular system or organization. This is a comparison between an MRP and order point system, which you'll see. This is table 16.1 at the bottom of page 409. And you see some of the key distinctions between the two. One distinction is the requirements philosophy used in the MRP systems versus a replenishment philosophy used in the order point system. A replenishment philosophy indicates that material should be replenished when it runs low, but in an MRP system does not do that. And we heard the term from chapter 15 of this lumpy components or parts are ordered based on demand. Another distinction between these two that's indicated in this table is the use of forecasting. For the order point system, future demand is forecasted on the basis of past history. And these forecasts are used to replenish the stock levels, where in an MRP systems, past demand for component parts really becomes irrelevant. So this comparison, table 16.1, is a good snapshot of those differences associated with that. Some of the MRP elements requires for the input to the master schedule, bill of material, or inventory system, which is really about the capacity planning, how we're going about doing our purchasing decisions, and how we're going to manage our resources. And in our example in our textbook, they give us the shop floor control, but that could be in figure 16.1 where the shop orders come in, the capacity, the shop floor control, and the operations. But the shop floor control is where the production process and the feeds into the operations. So all of that is some of the MRP elements. Over on page 410, we have a discussion with reference to parts explosion and how using the analogy of a table to help us focus on this parts explosion process. And in this figure 16.4, a table is being manufactured where it has a top, leg assemblies, short and long rails and legs. And this is how we want to make sure that we have enough inventory and the inventory is built in advance and the inventory is being stored so that we can make a table even quicker and not have to wait as it goes through the shop floor, through its operations, through its final component assembly. This is where using a bill of materials, where we understand what's going to be the time and what's going to be the quantities that we see in figure 16.3 on page 411, really helps us in determining what materials we need, what do we need to have on time, and what's going to be the assembly or lead time it's going to take. Part of this is that planned lead time for the manufacturing and purchasing of parts, which you see that in this table, similar to this table of figure 14.2, excuse me, 16.2 at the bottom of page 311. And part of this is really helping us realize that using this parts explosion is about constructing a materials plan that's going to help us complete or help us finish, assemble all the components so that we'll have a finished product. And these quantities that we see here listed are somewhat, could be considered gross requirements for completed tables, because in our example, what we were really looking for in table 16.3 here is trying to complete a bill of material that was going to give us enough tables so that we can have 50 tables on hand at all times. Thus, as we go through and do the calculations to require what we're going to need, really talking about the net requirement of the materials on hand, which is typically offset by the planned lead times. And therefore, this is integrated into the master schedule so that we can make sure that we can predict out what's going to be the gross requirements per week to ensure that our planned order releases, that we are meeting the demands of our customers. So the on-hand inventory and schedule receipts in this particular example are subtracted off the lead time to arrive to the planned order release for the tabletop and the leg assembly. And again, you see that this is table 16.3 on page 412. So this example really is about this time phase materials plan on page 413, where we have all the purchase orders and all the shop orders, which are integrated to provide the materials when they're needed at the right place and time in the assembly, in the manufacturing process. And we manage these lead times so that we can meet the planned lead times where there be no unnecessary inventory accumulations, or in other words, we'll waste the time waiting for materials that's on the shop floor. We have the right material at the right station in the assembly process so that the orders for the delivery of the completed tables can be completed at the least cost possible, as we can maintain our efficiency and effectiveness through our manufacturing process, so that, again, we can meet the demands of our customers. That's really what a bill of materials and how the bill of materials is being used to determine a materials plan. And all that is inserted into a master schedule. And by controlling that master schedule, certainly top management can control customer service, inventory levels, as well, and a very important component of manufacturing cost. And the master schedule by itself is a great tool, but it does take the human intervention to be able to collect the data, interpret the data, analyze that data, and make meaningful managerial decisions on what's going to be the quantities. If we're going to have a production, when do we need to make that production? What's going to be the overall aggregate impact as we move forward in this master schedule, so that we can look at the cumulative production time to ensure that we have the sufficient time to obtain all the quantities that we need to be able to build the product that we need in the production to prevent unnecessary waste, to prevent unnecessary downtime, to expedite the changes that may be needed to ensure, again, that we're maximizing our capacity of our production process to take advantage of our economies of scale while having a buffer between the master schedule and the final customer demand, which helps us kind of smooth out the workloads and hopefully provide us faster customer service. So the bill of materials is that structured list over on page 414 of the parts that is needed to produce a particular finished product, subassembly, or part, or even purchase parts. And it really serves multiple functions. But for manufacturing process, it really is the lifeblood of a master schedule and how those, when you come to an assembly type of manufacturing process, in that you have to make sure that the bill of materials is only as good as the accuracy or the level of detail that goes into it. In that the downside of not being inaccurate and having low quantities or demands or forecast or excessive forecast demand has the potential of stock outs, excessive inventory, missing customer deadlines, having customers voting with their feet and going to our competitors. So it's just too important, and in some cases too costly, especially if you have a low margin, profit margin type of organization, to get the bill of materials and incorporating that into your master schedule incorrect. So it takes work, it takes effort, it takes commitment on behalf of the leadership team all the way down to everyone through the organization to ensure this process has the robustness that it needs. Inventory records over on page 415 is really about looking at the individual items and counting those individual items and ensuring that the inventory process is accurate, it is controlled, and that the materials are planned for, and that a small percentage of these items that are counted, we know where they are, why they're there, and that we're looking at to minimize the errors in our record keeping and correct any procedural problem that we're having that's causing us to delay our production process. So as we see here, you got an item master data segment, this data segment, the subsidiary data segment in the records, which over on page 415, 416. 415. Capacity planning was the next one associated with this particular chapter. And it's really about looking at what are the elements that is required for the order launching of the MRP system. Typically, the capacity planning is to aid management in checking on the validity of the master schedule. Two ways in which this is accomplished is through shot loading and finite capacity scheduling, where shot loading is used. It's using the full parts explosion to run it before capacity planning. And the shop orders are then loaded against the work centers to ensure that the inventory is assigned correctly to the right work centers to maintain the overall production capabilities of that particular organization, where it's really about ensuring that the parts are in the right place and is balanced against what is the capacity or the availability or the ability of that organization based on the scarcity of its resources. So that's what capacity planning is really about, aiding management to validate the master schedule. Purchasing over on page 416 is another one of these concepts that's got to be considered when you're talking about an MRP system, because past due orders are largely eliminated from this type of systems. If the bill of materials are accurate, your forecasting are correct, then you know you're executing a valid materials plan where much of the expediting that typically costs organizations more money because typically when we plan poorly, it costs us more money because we have to expedite our parts to get them in to ensure that we are meeting the customer demand. And using this purchasing invalid materials plan is also about concentrating on ensuring our vendors are qualified, looking at alternate sources of supply, working with suppliers to ensure that our parts are delivered, they're delivered on time, they're delivered with quality, and at the lowest cost possible. Shop floor control over on page 416 is really about what are going to be the priorities from the shop floor or that's going to be given, that's going to be released to the shop floor so that they can manage the shop floor in the resources, set priorities of their production process where as soon as one job is completed, the next job is ready to go. There's no waiting, no downtime. The lead times are fully understood where that the function of that is to provide the information so that they can manage the production lead time effectively. And it is possible through a shop floor to de-expedite orders when they really have a good, robust system, where they got a good inventory management system, where they know what they need, when they need it, and how they need it through that manufacturing process. As we continue on operating that MRP system, over on page 417, obviously, it's got to have human intelligence. The computer programming of these systems is only as good as the data that's going in. So inserting wrong data gives you, as you can imagine, wrong output. And as you operate or considering some of the detail that needs to be going in, certainly we've talked about safety stock and how important safety stock is, how much safety stock really needs to be considered, what is the safety lead time that's got to be considered for some of these component parts, especially if you have an unreliable vendor and that cannot be remedied, or if you have a sole source vendor, or if you have a vendor who takes holidays off, say like the fourth week, the July 4th week, and that you do not, you still depend upon those parts. How do I ensure that I have the lead time in the uncertainty of handling the safety capacity to ensure that my production level continues, my efficiency, economies of scale, so that I can keep my costs as low as I possibly can as a manufacturer, so that I can still meet my ever-changing customer demands. So these are some of the things you want to consider on 417, page 418 when it comes to operating this type of system. What are some of the elements that's required for a successful system over on page 418, 419. If you look at table 16.4, you see some of the old attitudes. You know, one of them I've heard a lot is that we've always done it this way before, which is a comment that if you're thinking about change and continuous improvement, typically is one of those that cultures that you have to overcome in any organization. But these are some of the elements that's required for a successful MRP system, and certainly implementation planning. It's a prerequisite to implement and deploy any type of MRP system. So without good communication, without good preparation, all it may do is create confusion and misunderstanding later. So over communicating, explaining where we're going, and making sure the plan is well laid out, well thought out, has specific milestones with specific champions of those milestones and how they're coming together in an aggregate format to ensure the overall system is working. IT support, absolutely important, because this is a computer-driven type of process. And if your computer system is outdated, antiquated, then it's going to be very difficult to implement. What goes into that database is absolutely data, and that data has got to be absolutely accurate. Any type of lax record keeping or forecasting off the cuff is just simply not robust enough when you're entering this type of system. So the bill of material have to be accurate, and there's got to be a methodology or method or process or procedure that's developed by the organization to ensure they are maintained as accurate as they possibly can be. Management. You've heard the saying, organization rise and falls with management. Well, that's absolutely paramount. And management has absolutely got to get in behind it and support it, because this is a laborious process. It's going to require dedicated effort, dedicated resources. And I'm quite confident that most organizations, like I'm familiar with, are not having the luxury of having additional resources. In fact, you have to do a lot with what you got. And it seems like businesses today are demanding we do more with less. So having management support, committing to that support is paramount. But once you get through it and you implement it, if it has the robustness of it that it should, hopefully you'll reap the benefits from that in better production and inventory management controls. And certainly, it's got to start from the top all the way down through the organization. You cannot disregard those people out there who works with this every day and not get their buy-in and listen to what they have to say and how you could utilize that to gain, to improve this process. So even the person at the lower levels of the organization need to have a voice in this process. And where's that start at? That's right, here with management. It got to start at the very top. So this enterprise resource planning system over on page 420, 421, we'll conclude this chapter with this. It is really about, it's an integration and extension of what the MRP system really is about. And it helps coordinate all of these systems. And these systems may be accounting, maybe finance, maybe production, maybe operations, maybe manufacturing, maybe human resources, maybe marketing. All of that is incorporated into this ERP planning system. It's really about how do I integrate and maximize all my resources of any particular organization and how they're being coordinated each and every day. That's making decisions by the senior management team to ensure that the company is being productive, is being efficient and effectiveness as it can, is maintaining and growing its market share so that it's not losing its competitive advantage. It's really about developing their distinctive competencies, which is going to make them better than their competition. Over on page 421, there's a table 16.5, which looks at the cross-functional integration through this data sharing of a ERP system. And here they list four major areas: the finance system, human resources, sales, marketing, operations, and logistics. It's really a foundation and a basis for companies to use it as a cross-functional integration, again, so that they take their existing systems that may have gone off separately and bring them back so that the organization can, again, come back to being efficient and effective and efficient as they possibly can. And here's a few of the major software vendors that typically you can see when it comes to an ERP system. I know there's others, but this is just a couple. So with that, this concludes chapter 16, and thank you so much for watching this video.